Well, welcome to the journey.
Thank you.
Andrea Holmes. Let me explain a little bit about what the journey is about. The journey is a show about individuals who've had maybe struggles in their life or setbacks, some type of thing that may have happened in their life, which happens to, all of us, or at least many of us. And what have they done with those experiences, and how have they recreated themselves, how have they failed forward, how through resiliency and the development of resiliency have they transformed. And so I know that we just recently met, and but I've heard a lot of great things about you.
Well, thanks.
But before we get started, tell me a little bit about who you are and what do you do, and if someone was, we were going to introduce you to someone, who's Andrea? Well,
I am a Rockford native.
Okay.
Art teacher. Been teaching for RPS for just my 29th year. Done all kinds of things in the classroom, but ended up doing that most of my career. I have a daughter. She's 26.
Okay. What's her first name?
Lindsay.
Lindsay. Okay.
Lindsay. Yeah, she lives in Chicago now.
Okay.
And I'm just, I don't know. I've had a lot of different things happen to me in my life. I've had a lot of ups and a lot of downs.
Okay.
But I guess if you have to ask me one word, I'm a survivor.
Okay. All right. Well, before we jump into some of those stories of what that means to be a survivor, what do you do for fun? What if you were going to have a time that didn't have too many demands on you? What would you do for fun? What makes you come alive?
I'm an artist. I like to paint, and I also have a loom at home.
Okay.
So I do that. I read every day. I probably read a book every couple of weeks. I go outside all the time with my dog and hike and.
Okay. So if we went to your bookshelf right now, what would be a couple books that we'd see on your bookshelf?
Currently I'm reading The Nickel Boys.
Okay.
And that's about, it's a fictional story based on the Dozier School, and I'm not sure where that is, but it's a reform school for boys.
Sure. Yeah.
Have you heard of that?
Yep.
Yeah, so it's a fictional account of that.
Okay.
So I'm reading that. I like David Sedaris a lot.
Okay.
I have To Kill a Mockingbird. I've read that a few different times.
Okay.
So I'm kind of all over the place.
Sure. I resemble that. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love to read, and I'll be reading more than one book at a time.
Oh, absolutely.
So that happens as well.
Absolutely.
So how did you get into art? Because my wife is an artist, and I'm always interested in how that came about. So tell me, how'd you find obviously a passion for art, but then later you were able to turn that into a career. When did that all begin?
Boy, I don't really know. I mean, I've always liked it. I've always done stuff. I've always had people say, "Oh, can you do this for me or that or whatever?" So I just kind of progressed along. But my passion really came alive when I started teaching art.
Oh, okay.
So, teaching was what really opened it up, and I became freer to do my own things. I kind of get through things where I'm stuck in a block right now.
Okay.
So I'm hoping maybe this is going to help me.
Okay.
Come out of it. I don't know.
Okay. All right.
But
and so you've been teaching for 29 years, and for the Rockford School District the entire time. Okay. And you teach at the grade school level.
Yes.
Right. And it's always been elementary level.
Yes.
Okay.
Always has been.
Okay. And what led you to go into education then? How did that, and then art maybe was another part of that, but what led to going into being a teacher?
I love connecting with people.
Okay.
And for me, school is an important place for me. It was a safe place for me. I had a lot of teachers that I just fell in love with. I was one of those kids that wanted to go home with the teacher. But I just love learning too. I'm curious about absolutely everything and knowing different things about different things, and So I love that atmosphere too.
Okay.
I love the atmosphere where you can make mistakes and it's okay.
Sure. Well, it's interesting that you say that, because that idea that it's okay to make mistakes is sometimes what I hear the opposite of, especially in the schools, that there's such an emphasis on, if it has to do with sports, on winning, if it has to do with academics, about getting it right or getting an A.
Right.
And it seems, from an outsider, it seems like sometimes it's more about regurgitation of information than it is about the whole process of learning, which means there's going to be struggle with trying to get a concept or in wrestling with it, and that's okay.
Yeah, and that's where we learn.
Yeah.
We learn by doing, we learn by making mistakes. That's where we learn the most.
Right.
And I think there's an emphasis on test scores in RPS and probably most districts, but that really comes from up top. When in the trenches, we don't feel that way. As teachers, we get a lot of pressure to get those test scores up, but really it's not about that. It's about having a safe atmosphere, environment for kids to learn and open up, and that's where true learning comes from. It's not regurgitation, because regurgitation is a lower level learning, and if you're thinking about test scores, they're testing also higher level thinking, so you have to be able to break out of that. That's the first step. We don't need to be stuck on the first step. We want to grow our students, not just spit them out.
Right. When you talked about a safe learning environment, that's multifaceted, right? And so if you could talk just a little bit of when you think of a safe learning environment for your students at Gregory, what is it that you're trying to create when you refer to it as a safe learning environment?
An environment that has a feeling when you walk into it. Places when you walk in, you have a vibe. An accepting, calm space just to be you. And we have a lot of children in trauma, and so they're coming in with lots of issues and lots of things on their mind and lots of worries, and just a space to be. And if those surface, that's okay. And we're learning as a staff. We're training different techniques and just modeling. It's okay to make mistakes, and safe physical safety. It's a place where they can eat breakfast, they can eat lunch, they can stop and go. We have little chill zones in our rooms, and we just have different squeeze balls and different meditation techniques. And so we'll have kids that will just gonna have a meltdown, and push tables and all kinds of stuff, and I've had kids just in the middle of a meltdown, they stop and they breathe, and sometimes you'll say, do you need the chill zone? Or they'll just go and they'll just sit in there, and however long it takes. There's one in every single room. Every adult knows about it, every kid knows about it. I think that's the biggest thing that makes them feel safe. They're not going to be judged.
Right.
And the kids are really good too, because someone goes to the chill zone, that's okay, that's their thing.
Sure. Interesting. I think that's the idea of all the different facets of creating that safe place for learning, and creating that you could be vulnerable enough to be curious, to explore, which of course means that you're probably not going to get it right the first time.
That's right.
And then working at and being open to instruction and guidance. And so I know maybe a year ago I started doing some work on trainings within the school system about resiliency and developing resiliency. And one of the things that we talked about. It went in steps as I was doing the research. One of it was for the educators to, in their own life, to be able to identify gratitude, but then also to identify their own stories of resiliency. And I know that as we were talking earlier, you have a couple stories of yourself in some of the trauma that you experienced in your own life. And so maybe you can touch a little bit about that, because as you mentioned, some of the students that come in have not only some of the trauma from the community, the neighborhood that they may in, but it also may be happening within their own homes, and that could be a variety of different types of trauma. So when you, from your own experience, you talked about before we met, before we started today, you talked a little bit about some things that you experienced earlier in your life. So maybe you can just touch a little bit on that.
Well, I think, when you asked me why I got into teaching, I think that was kind of the embedded meaning for me. Okay. Because I wanted to provide a place like I had growing up. Life can be a little chaotic, and sometimes things outside of school are beyond your control, especially when you're a child. So I think that's why I got into teaching. And so I'm sorry, tell me again.
So, I think you just started leading into it. So growing up, there was some, in your own home, the reason why school was such a safe place for you was because there was some chaos going on in your own home. Is that
No, tell me before. See, that's my chemo. That's my other story.
That's okay. Well, we were just talking about how earlier in your life that there was some trauma that you experienced, and then that is where you can identify with some of the students.
Okay, thanks. I see kids. I see myself in a lot of the kids. And I know what it was like to sort of be lost a little bit. Okay. And so when I can identify trauma behavior. Okay. Withdrawing, aggression, just kind of like a deadness in their eyes. So when I see this, I'm sorry, my chemo brain is.
It's okay. So if you do see a student that is struggling, or maybe not struggling, but all of a sudden there's a change in affect, or they kind of have that blank look on their face, you're recognizing that there may be something else going on. They just haven't just checked out.
Oh, right. Yeah, and it's the student is not their behavior, and the behavior is communication, and it's taken me a long while in my journey to not take their behavior personally.
Sure, yeah.
Or to get really annoyed by it, because it can be annoying. But that's where I use my own meditation and my techniques. But yeah, I can see that. I can connect with that, and where I can't really use words to express how that is. But it's really gratifying to reach somebody. Sometimes it's just a little touch point, and then it's covered up again. But you see little glimmers of kids.
Right. Well, I think you said something there that I think is a tendency as maybe as an educator, as an instructor, or as an adult, if we see a student or a younger person not following the directions, or not following, not being compliant at that moment or whatever, there is a tendency for us to take it personal, as if somehow the behavior is a reflection on us.
Right.
And you're saying that because of your own experience and as well as your own training, that may not be the case.
Yes.
And that there may be some other story that's happening with the person.
Absolutely. There's so much more behind the behavior. The behavior is just what we see.
Right.
We don't see what's going on inside.
So at that time period with one of your students, let's say, not saying any names, but if you saw that, what would be your what's your tendency to how do you interact with that particular student?
It really depends on the student.
Okay.
My natural response is to go right in.
Sure.
And I know that a lot of our kids, you have to be really careful of their personal space, and trust issue. You have to build a lot of trust. So I really try to read the kid, and it's just like a split-second read.
Sure.
So it just really depends on it. But one of the things that I like to say is, "What do you need?"
Okay.
And I don't know. I said, well, and then I'll say, well, would you like to go to the chill zone? Do you need to step out in the hallway and get a drink of water? Do you need to talk to somebody? Just kind of go down the menu.
Sure.
So kids in trauma are not used to that.
Right.
So it takes some training on their part. We're all in it together. We're all learning together.
Sure, right. And like you said, I think it is that every student's going to be different, because and even then, a student may be different in September than they're going to be in February, right?
Or in the morning to the afternoon, or this minute to the next minute.
Right.
That's the thing I found about trauma too, is it's not predictable in any way.
Okay. Well, and I think as a result of trauma, when we identify something as trauma, it's something that has happened to us that was out of our control,
right?
And in some ways, it still is unpredictable. And there's usually the thing that seems to have deeper roots with it is that somehow we've internalized it and made it personal, emotionally. So when we think about the difference between if a stranger, you get hit by a stranger, that's one thing, and the physical wound will heal. But if you get hit by a family member, that's different.
Another level.
Yeah, the skin may heal, the flesh may heal at the same rate in both cases, but the emotional impact may be different. For the latter. So
I think it's if it's a family member or someone that you know or trust or love, it's hits you at your core, your soul, and that's we can recover, but we can accept, but we can't forget. We can't ever forget that stuff.
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier about that you would identify yourself as being a survivor, and then also, so tell us a little bit about that. Survivor implies that you experienced something in your life. So tell us a little bit about that, or where you'd want to go with that.
Well, I survived domestic violence. I was married for 28 years.
Okay.
And it wasn't. Now I remember that show, The Burning Bed.
Yeah, the Farrah Fawcett.
It wasn't the burning bed scenario.
Okay.
It wasn't physical. It was emotional and mental, and everything that I did was controlled. When I ate, when I went to sleep, what I wore. I couldn't see friends. I couldn't do any of that stuff. Just every single way you can control a person, I was controlled, and I just was living my life like a robot. And I would have little glimmers of, this isn't right, I don't like it, but what can I do? Because I have a daughter.
Okay.
And I was told that I would lose custody of my daughter by my ex.
Okay.
So I waited until she was able to move out of the house. And that last summer, she was going to move away to Milwaukee. That last summer got really bad, and the physical started amping up.
Okay.
So the last night that we were together, just he and I were in the house, he held me against my will for a long time in the house and got pretty violent. And I'm a believer in God. I don't care what the name is. It's something bigger than me. And we were upstairs, and we had all these sheets of drywall, which is a whole nother story why those are there. But couldn't get out. It was hours. And I heard a voice that said, push the drywall on him, just as clear as we're talking. And so I did, and that gave him enough pause. He was under some drywall that I ran downstairs. I couldn't get out the front door because the lock was weird. He would never fix that. He didn't want me to. I don't think he wanted me to leave on my own. So I called 911 on our landline because he had broken my cell phone. And it's so weird. I'm standing there as close as we are, and this person that I loved for so many years, even though he was abusive, I still loved him. He's standing there, and I have to describe what he's wearing to the 911 operator. And he's like, he was going to take the phone and rip it off the wall. I said, it's done. I've already called. So we waited. He said, get your coat on because you're going to get arrested. It's not going to be me. So I got my coat on and I waited to be arrested. And they came in and they separated us. And I was lucky to have 2 cops that knew something about domestic violence, because a lot of times
they don't. Yeah.
They blame the victim. Mm-hmm. So we talked, and I was upstairs talking to the cop, and all of a sudden I didn't hear anything downstairs, and I went downstairs, and there he is out in the cop car. And I just looked at him, and I just kind of got a little giddy, because I thought, okay, the cage door is open and I'm free. So after that, I just, it's grief. It's a grief process, the whole thing, and I just made it through.
Did he have any contact with you after that?
Just in court.
Oh, okay.
Court, yeah. He never worked, so I put him through school, got an MBA.
Goodness.
Yeah, he has student loans, but I paid for it too, and I was the primary caregiver and whatnot. But no, I paid maintenance for him while we were going through the divorce.
So you paid temporary maintenance because he wasn't working and you were? He
wasn't working, yeah, so I paid my abuser.
Okay.
So, but anyway, we ended up finally divorcing. He drug it out, and price of freedom. Mm-hmm. Money was okay. You take it all if you want. Mm-hmm. I'm free, and I never looked back. The hardest thing for me was giving up on the dream.
Yeah. The
dream of being married and growing old with somebody. But once I was able to let that go, I found in myself, there's an Albert Camus, that quote, and I can't get it exactly right. In the midst of winter, I found in me my invincible summer, something like that. Yeah. And I found my summer. Yeah. I mean, I still have days where that I'll get flashbacks, and certain triggers and things, but I'm able to cope with them. I'm not afraid of things anymore. Okay. That's the big thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me, because I know there's a handful of people that may not fully grasp domestic violence, and you're talking also about another face of domestic violence that, because we typically think of it being physical.
Right.
And clearly that is the majority of times it is physical, but physical doesn't necessarily come without the verbal and the emotional.
Right.
But you and your ex started dating. How old were you when you started dating?
Oh gosh, 19.
Okay, so
got married at 21.
Okay, so you were young.
Wouldn't advise that.
Yeah. So you were young, but I'm guessing, and this is where sometimes where people don't really understand. Well, if he was that way from the very beginning, why did you stick around? But was it like that at the very beginning?
He was not like that. No one would stay with somebody if they were like that from the very beginning. Absolutely no one.
Sure.
So it's slow. They get you in and establish some kind of environment where you catch more bees with honey. So okay, I was in and I trusted him. I'm not a super trusting person. I was, and I am way more now. But he just kind of got me in. And I used to say, even while I was going through it, oh, if he hit me, I would be gone, you know. But he did something, I don't know, I don't want to say more insidious because it's not a either or, but it was really insidious, the mind control and the mind games, and it makes you feel like you're absolutely, you're so stupid. How could you survive outside? You don't trust your own mind. There's a lot of gaslighting, and so the violence didn't occur until he knew that I was making a plan. But I wasn't. That's what I want to really impart to anyone that's in that situation now, is when you're making a plan, don't let that person know. You do that because that's the most dangerous time, is when you're making that plan and when you first get out.
And maybe speak a little bit more to that, because it sounds like you learned that because it did come out that you were making a plan. And why do you think, from your own experience and also what you've come across, why is that the most dangerous time? Because I think a lot of times when there's verbal arguments going back and forth, because you're educated, you're going to stand up for yourself, so you get into arguments, and then of course then he'll probably say things or do things that are where you wouldn't go. So why is that the most dangerous time period? If you share with somebody, either out of a threat or out of I'm not as weak as you think I am, or whatever the motivation is, why has that become the most dangerous?
Well, because they're losing control. It's all about control. Like I said, my ex controlled absolutely everything, but the mind is the worst thing. I mean, I've been in a lot of DV groups. Remedies has saved my life.
Sure, yeah.
But control is the main thing. A lot of us women had said, just hit me and get it over with, because then that's done. It's that waiting for that other shoe to drop. And so they're losing control. And in arguments, I was the type of person that would always back down. And so when I stopped backing down, that's when the shift happened for me, and then also for him. Because they don't want you leaving. I think a big part is they don't want you to talk to other people and see that this really is not right. It's not normal, and you're getting out from underneath their thumb. And then they become desperate.
And so another part that you just alluded to is that they don't want you talking to other people.
Right.
And so you're from Rockford.
Right.
So do you have family here in Rockford?
I do. Okay. My dad lives in town and my sister lives in town.
Okay. And so growing up with mom and dad were married? Okay. So when growing up with your sister and mom and dad, what was that household like? What was your house like growing up?
We weren't. Alcoholism was an issue. Okay. And we my sister said it best, we were all kind of islands. Okay. So no one was close to anyone else, really. There was no arguing or anything like that, but it was just kind of just everybody go and do your own thing.
So you keep stuff inside?
Yes, you keep stuff inside.
You kept stuff inside.
Oh, yes.
School was a refuge.
Yep.
It was a safe place. There was multiple teachers that you wanted to go home with. Because they were kind and nurturing at school. So and so then you meet your ex. Of course, he's charming.
Can I just interrupt?
Yeah, sure.
I love my dad to pieces, and I love my mom. They're great people. I don't want to say that they weren't.
Well, and I thank you for clarifying that, because we may not get all our needs met by our parents, because they may not have necessarily known how to do that.
Right. Absolutely.
But they don't have to be demonized.
No, not at all.
It's just part of the story. It's just part of how we may have come into our adulthood.
Absolutely, and it's part of what made me stronger. It really did. So I'm thankful to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
And I think that is, with individual, parents that may have alcoholism going on, or there may be physically there, but maybe not emotionally fully available, meaning being able to express pain, being able to express joy, being able to express fear or sadness, but maybe only certain aspects. Well, we don't get that full range of development, and we're not modeling it for our kids.
Right, that's true.
But unfortunately, sometimes, though, it does set us up for it's almost like a training, because that's what happened when you got married.
Agreed.
Because you already knew how to compartmentalize.
Right.
And keep stuff inside.
Yeah.
And until that you try to, you learned that you could break out of that. So you get divorced, and that didn't come with its own penalties, right? Because the way that the system is set up, and because your situation, though in domestic violence, it's probably unfortunately more common than not.
Yes.
But the system as a whole usually that isn't always the way it is the system as a whole, meaning the legal system, when people are going through divorces, that the perpetrator in this case was also the abuser. Or no, let me say, the perpetrator was the abuser, but wasn't the primary money winner.
Yes.
And so I think that is unfortunate that the system didn't work for you in that way. Though the system did work to allow you to have your freedom.
Yes, and like I say, the price of freedom is worth everything. Yeah. I know why the cage bird sings.
Yeah. So then, as you started learning how, and you were young when you guys got together, so you were redoing life, right?
Yeah, right.
And not only the freedom, but then also how to think for yourself, and how to do a lot of things. And so what was that like? Even though you were doing a lot of singing at the time, what was that like? So that would have put you in your early 40s, right?
No, later 40s.
Later 40s, okay, later 40s. Yeah. And so what was that like, being able to explore life now without getting permission from someone?
At first it was scary.
Sure.
But I kind of felt like a dare too, when you're a kid, and the dare you, I shouldn't do that. But so for me, it started out with just little things. I couldn't make any decisions about what was in the house or whatever, and I just got this little paper towel holder, and I saw it, and I was like, when I saw it, I was like, oh, I like that. Oh, I can't get that. Well, wait a minute. Yes, I can. I had this little dialogue in my head, and so I got it, and I was so happy, and I'd look at it every day. I mean, it sounds so inane, but it just gave me such peace and happiness, and I knew I was on my road. Okay.
So that was an example of knowing that you're healing from the trauma.
Yeah, and just I was in a session with Christina, and I didn't have any emotions about anything. I just really was shut down. And she was talking about my sister and how we reconnected, because I wasn't allowed to see any of my family either. Okay. So we reconnected, and she was asking me how I felt. And I realized, I said, I think I missed my sister. That's what that feels like. And I asked her, is that what that is? She goes, yeah, that's what that is. So there's all kinds of emotions that I hadn't felt in years and years and years.
So in a lot of ways, and I think that's also what's important for people to understand, is that, one is when the trauma is going on, and then when you are released, right, then you do have that freedom. Then it's about how to learn how to live again.
That's right.
And it's so many times that people will go back to their original order, even if it was chaotic, with a different partner.
Because that's what you know.
And don't experiment and be curious about how to grow into who God created you to be.
Right.
So and then you mentioned also that you got divorced. Your divorce was officially over when?
Of 2014.
Okay, so in 2014. And then you mentioned that chemo, that you mentioned, I'm assuming you had cancer.
Yes.
And when were you diagnosed with cancer, and what type of cancer?
I was diagnosed in May of 2017.
Okay.
Stage 2 breast cancer.
Okay.
Pretty aggressive. I went in for a regular mammogram 1 year, and the next year, the nurse had said, next year do a dense mammogram, because I have dense tissue, and a lot of women do. And I said, okay, well, do you think insurance will pay for that? And she said, I'm not sure. I think so. Anyway, so I went in and I got that, just sort of like, oh, I should do this. And they found it there. And then they did the biopsy, and everything just happened with immediate succession. I got the diagnosis on a Thursday, and I went up to Madison. That's where I got all my treatment. Madison was on the phone to me Thursday night, and I was seeing the surgeon and oncologist on Monday, and then I started chemo on Wednesday.
Oh my gosh.
So it was boom,
in less than a week.
Yeah.
You went from a confirmed diagnosis.
Yeah, less than a week.
To starting treatment in less than a week.
But that's the thing that domestic violence did for me. It gave me many gifts. But that's one is, okay, what do I have to do?
Okay.
Let's go.
Okay.
So I always just kept my head up, and I just kept moving.
Okay. So when you say that the gifts that domestic violence has given you, was that gift that was that learned in the 28, 29 years that you were married, or the gift that you afterwards that you learned that you just gotta keep going, or maybe both?
All the way through.
All the way. Okay.
All the way through, and I learned that from childhood too.
Okay.
All the way through.
Okay.
All the way through.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, alcoholism was in your family upbringing, and though there wasn't abuse and there wasn't domestic violence and that, but there was emotional lack of development that happened. And then, like you said, just as you got involved in this relationship, you have a child, you're trying to create a life, you're trying to create this family.
The dream.
The dream, right? This is what artists do, right? We dream.
Right, yeah.
and we'll fill in the blanks when they don't.
That's for sure.
Right? And then, but there was lessons that were learned that now when you get this cancer diagnosis and started treatment within less than a week, which is in itself amazing, but also grateful that things could happen that fast. Yeah. How long were you going through the chemo and going through the treatment?
Chemo was, I want to say 6 months.
Okay.
So I'd have a treatment every 3 weeks. And then after, well, actually, the hard chemo was that I was on chemo for a year.
Okay.
But the hard chemo where you lose your hair and all that good stuff. Okay. That was 6 months. And after that, I had 2 surgeries, and I had 5 weeks of radiation.
Okay.
So start to finish, it was like a year and a half, maybe, something like that, maybe a little less.
Okay. And during that time period, who did you have other support? You're now 3 years out of the marriage. Who was your support at that time? Who were you leaning into? What was it like going through that aspect of treatment's happening? You've been through some tough stuff, but now this is the new dragon that you're facing. And there's consequence to this. Little things like losing your hair, right? Little things. And were you working at the time? So fill me in.
I was working, but I got a leave of absence. Okay. So and most of the chemo was over summer. Okay. So tell me again.
Essentially, as you were going through the treatment, and even though you were grateful that it was a pretty quick diagnosis and treatment was right away, some of those life things, the side effects of the chemo, what was it like in those times? Because there's going to be people who are listening that are want to know, what did you do to survive that piece?
Okay. Well, I learned to trust in other people. That started with the coming out of the domestic violence situation, but then cancer also, it knocks you on your knees, and you have to learn how to trust because you can't go through it alone. So I prayed a lot. I had just met a man who's now my boyfriend, Mark.
Okay.
I met him probably a few months before I was diagnosed, and so we were kind of a newer couple, and he just said, okay, what are we going to do? And he took me to every treatment. He's retired Army. Took me to every treatment. He, held my hand, but he's also, he's been through his own things in the war. He was a paratrooper and lots of injuries and things, and he just said, okay, let's go. So, I had like 2 days, I think, where I sort of fell apart. And you need those days to fall apart and cry and, and a little bit of the poor me. But you can visit, but you can't live there.
Sure.
So I got through it just by, this is temporary. I can do this. There's Facebook pages. I went through, there was a program at St. Anthony's. I was still going through counseling. We went to saw Christina a lot. Okay. But I just had faith. I had faith in God, and I had faith in myself. Okay. And I really hadn't had faith in myself before. So I never thought about dying. It never entered my mind. I never. And Mark, my boyfriend, says don't claim the disease, so I never said my cancer or my doctor or my surgeon or my disease.
Okay.
So I just kept moving, and I leaned on people when I needed to lean on them. I felt every single emotion that I needed to feel in that day or that night. But chemo's tough. It's like hard chemo is feeling like you have a massive hangover that never goes away. So every day was just felt like I can't even get out. I couldn't eat. I didn't have any taste buds. It kills your taste buds. Your eyes are constantly dripping because it dries out your eyes. Okay. So I'd go to the store and people would look at me and think I was crying. Oh, I'm like, no, it's cancer.
Sure.
But I went out without a wig. Okay. I got a wig, but I never really wore it because it just felt like it just wasn't me. So I donated it.
Okay.
My dad bought me that wig, so sorry, Dad. I didn't wear it as much as I should. But yeah, just if I were to give somebody advice, I'd just say connect with as many survivors and people that are going through it as you can, and do things that feed you. Even the smallest things, go out for a walk. Force yourself in the beginning to go out for a walk because that's so important. Eat, get as much nutrition as you can, and get up off the couch.
Okay. So movement.
Yes.
And don't go based upon how you feel.
Right.
Because there's a
Fake it till you make it.
Yeah, there's a need to push through because you may not be able to trust how you feel being the right thing for you.
That's well said.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. There's another thing that you said, and I think it came maybe from Mark, and he didn't use these words, but also a critical piece was cancer is part of your story, but didn't have to be your story.
Doesn't define me.
Right.
It's just one of those ingredients that made me pretty awesome cake.
Okay. Okay. So I want to go back to ask you some questions about now. You've been so that was in 2017, right? So divorce happens, separation happens, and then you have a 3-year reprieve. And then, and so it's been over a year now since you had any treatments. Is that about right? Okay.
Yeah.
and you're back in the schools working. And so, and I know they're doing, you were talking earlier about they're doing some different things specifically within your school to try to connect with and help the students to create a safe place. You talked specifically about the classroom, having the different classrooms having chill zones, and I think there's Gregory was part of the trauma-informed education and care. But then you mentioned something about mindfulness, a mindfulness school. Is that, did I have that correct? What does that mean?
It means being mindful of where you are in the here and now. And trying to let go of things that are external that you cannot control. Not missing any of the good things. For those kids, they're in a constant state of the fight or flight. So we give them tools to become mindful in the present moment. I do guided meditation with them, yoga with them, and I'm teaching them poses for different emotions like anger and vulnerability, and you have to be careful with those. It could be too much for that person. But we're just really stressing on empowering kids. But what you have, what you need already inside, and it's our job to help you bring that out of yourself.
All right. So two questions with that. One is this idea of, you happen to be an art instructor, and so
I get to be.
Yes, and so and then you may have the one who's teaching math may go, well, how am I going to do this? It's easy for you, but before if we do get a chance to address that, but how do you think for you art allows? I was reading an article just recently about art being a platform in which you can help develop empathy. And how would you say that in your experience, how would you say that you've seen that, or how do you go to help facilitate that?
Well, art is it's such an open thing. There's no right, no wrong. It's just you. It's you at that moment, how you're feeling that moment, and it really opens up a lot of feelings. It helps you see how you think about certain things. Like for me, is control. I am uncomfortable when I'm not in control. But I'm way better than I was. You know. But when you're painting or sculpting or whatever we do in the classroom, doesn't have to look like that or like that. It's just you. And when you get in that zone, you are more, it's a meditative state. So you're more in touch with who you are, how you're feeling at that moment. And sometimes you're just silent. You're not thinking, you're just creating, you're just being. And how many times in life can we just be? And so that's a big part of why I like doing what I do. And to teach empathy, you have to know yourself first. To be able to be empathetic, you have to know yourself first. And so by utilizing different art forms and different projects and teaching certain things, but then for the students to be able to participate in that and get into that space, get into that zone, then they're, by knowing their own emotions and being in touch with that, and not being afraid of them,
then they're able to connect more with each other.
They're able to connect more with each other. And they see that there's no right or wrong. There's no one way to do it. There's just my way. And they don't like this in the beginning, but they'll come up and say, "What should I do?" So, well, what do you think? I don't know, Miss Alma, I don't know. Well, why don't you go find somebody and ask them, what do they think? So that kind of builds
some community that way.
Community is what it's all about. So I think art is really great a great place. It's been untouched by the academic powers that be.
Sure.
It's kind of, we don't know what you do. Maybe you just draw pictures all day.
Sure.
So
well, we are. I started a nonprofit 3.5 years ago called Shatter Our Silence, and it's a young adult program to prevent suicide, prevent suicide within young adults and raise awareness about mental illness. And in this coming in about 2 months, we are going to have an event called Out of the Ashes, and we're specifically going to be talking about the platform of athletics and the arts to help develop resiliency and allowing transformation to happen. And with the idea of resiliency developing, using art as a platform to develop resiliency, how have you seen some of your students develop resiliency in your classroom?
I think just the freedom to express themselves without judgment, the freedom to make a mistake, and that a mistake is an opportunity. I think that's kind of how I see all of my things that I've gone through. They're opportunities. You have to. I think the power of resiliency is seeing things as an opportunity. I can look and I can focus on, I have cancer, I'm going to lose my hair, I might die, or I might not make it out of my house tonight. I can look at that and sure they're there, but I have to see the opportunity in it. I have to see that there's a way out. And if I'm mindful, that will present itself if I let things come to me. So you have to see things in opportunities.
Sure.
And that's what I try to provide with my kids, is lots of opportunities. I don't say, this is how you do it. So here's the material, here's the prompt, now go. And that's the hardest, is to start, but they're getting better and better at it, and that translates into when they need to calm themselves down, or when they're thinking about things, they need to process emotions. Just, it's an opportunity. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of it, because things are going to happen. And you can choose to be afraid of something, or you can choose to embrace it, the warts and all. And it's going to be hard, but you're going to make it.
Yeah.
You're going to make it.
I think there's that tension, right? That in between space, between giving a framework, creating a space, having some instruction.
Right.
At the same time, a freedom to explore, be creative, and then, just as you were talking, when you purchased that paper towel holder, as you can then see in someone else's eyes when they've done something without being told what to do and how specifically to do it. But then you see that also, and then you can celebrate with them.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, you put that well.
So as we wrap up, and Andrea, thank you very much for coming here and sharing your story. If you were going to share something that you would want the listeners to part with, what would be either one thing about your story, or about how you utilize art or yoga or anything? What would you want them to?
Boy, just don't give up. Okay. It will come. Just be patient. It'll come. Yeah. And just go with the flow, I guess. Go with the flow.
Well, Andrea, I appreciate you sharing your story. The fact that you continue to pursue something more than the walls of your prison that you were in, and that you had the courage, because it's a crazy amount of courage you must have had to be able to step out of that and be open to the idea that maybe I need to push this this drywall.
Yes.
And then being open to that type of guidance as well. But then after you got your freedom, like many times, you had the courage to not sabotage it.
Right. Yes.
And then when you were faced with another opportunity or obstacle you had, you took some of those lessons that you learned and you did battle with cancer the same way.
Yeah, life's journey.
Yeah. And I appreciate what you're doing for our students.
Oh, thank you.
And for our community.
Thank you.
Because if we can plant some seeds when they're younger, maybe that will grow into something as they get older.
And I think too that people that are abusers, they're not born that way.
Right.
And so if I can just touch one person and turn that around, how many lives will that impact?
Yeah.
So,
unfortunately, abusers probably have just as much fear as the victims.
Oh, they have more, I think.
It's just directed in a different way.
It's directed in a different way. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
So that's not to say it's okay for them to be violent and abuse, either emotionally or verbally or physically, but there's a story there as well.
There is a story there, yeah.
So, Andrew, thank you again for being part of the journey and for being able to share this conversation.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for being with us today. And if for some reason you find yourself in a situation where domestic violence is happening in your life, or some type of violence is happening in your life, I know it takes a ton of courage to break that silence, but that's the first step. Ask for help. And if you don't get it the first place you ask, then continue asking until you're able to get some kind of reprieve from that and get some kind of guidance. Again, thank you for being here today, and we'll look forward to being with you again next week.